Take it.
I got it. Thanks.
The meeting is finished. Yes,
We'll share.
yes, that's great. What's your name?
Lisa, hi Rosemary. Are you Rosemary?
Yes.
I'm Lisa. Lisa Sermini, Bill Sermini. Thank you.
You can start, Mary Lou, if you're ready.
Oh, okay, I'm ready. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for coming to this workshop. Okay. The art and craft of the personal story. You all have handouts, I believe, and you'll be, you should have pen and pencil so that you can write on these handouts, because you will be taking notes as well as what's on the handouts. So if everybody has their handouts, we're ready to go. The techniques presented in this workshop were developed by Kim Weitkamp and are used with her permission. Kim Weitkamp compares the way that story works to the action in Newton's cradle. Newton's cradle is a series of metal balls suspended from the same height and touching each other. When you pull out the first ball and then release it, the middle balls don't move, but the last ball shoots out. The force is felt throughout all the balls, but we see the effect only in the last one. Story works its magic in the same way as Newton's cradle. When a storyteller tells a story, the first ball, there is, to an audience, there is an epiphany, a revelation, an insight. This epiphany is the second ball. It's their concept of things which changes. The third ball, their worldview changes. The fourth ball, their attitude changes. The fifth ball, their behavior, their inner behavior or their inner response changes. And finally, the sixth ball, their actions change. This is where the effect of the story is made visible. The power of story is that it creates change. Now, if you say to yourself, I don't have any stories like that, stories that are significant, that create change. In fact, I don't have any stories at all. You are mistaken. Have you ever had any trouble in your life?
No.
You are not alone. Where there is life, there is trouble. And where there is trouble, there is a story. Because trouble is the essence of story, of any story. Without trouble, there is no story. Story creates suspense. It keeps the audience on the edge of their seats. It makes them want to know what's going to happen next. How is the trouble going to be resolved? If you are alive, you have stories. And if you look, you will find them. One of the purposes of this workshop is to help you to find them. And one method for doing that, or one technique for doing that, is a technique called the memory map. Look at your first handout, the memory map. You all have that?
Yes.
Okay, this is what it looks like. The first handout. The memory map is a horizontal line with 5 vertical markers. It is a timeline. Each of the vertical markers stands for a memory. The first vertical marker stands for an early memory. Now, that early memory doesn't have to be the earliest memory you can recall. It can be just an early memory. For example, I have a story based on a memory of when I was in kindergarten. The last vertical line stands for a recent memory. Now, these memories don't have to be monumental and momentous. They can be very simple and mundane, like changing a flat tire. In fact, the 2013 world champion of public speaking, Prez Vasilev, won that championship with a story about changing a flat tire, and a good story it was too. The 3 markers in between stand for memories between those 2 endpoints. You are to fill in your memory map, your timeline, with an early memory, a recent memory, and 3 memories in between. Write just a few words above each of the markers that capture that memory for you. Does everybody know what they have to do with their memory map? Are there any questions about that memory map? Okay, you have 1 minute in which to fill in your timeline with an early memory, a recent memory, and 3 memories in between. Begin. Okay, your 1 minute is up. Now, hang on a minute, huh? Now, sticking to a 1 minute time limit and making out your memory map is very important. If you have more time, you'll start to think that the things you are writing down aren't important enough to make a story. Not true. Many little seemingly insignificant things that tumble out onto your timeline are doorways to significant turning points in your life from which life lessons can be learned. Now, in that 1 minute, you have come up with 5 memories. Take another look at those memories. Does one of them stand out from the rest? Does one of them interest you more than the rest? Does one of them resonate with you more than the rest? Pick that memory out of your timeline, off your timeline. Voila. If you've done that, you have the subject matter of your story. Now, has everybody got the memory that impressed them, that stood out to them, that resonated with them the most? Has everybody got that memory? Okay. Now I want you to close your eyes and walk through the memory you have chosen. Picture the people in that memory and the time and place in which it occurred. This is where you introduce the characters in your story and build your setting. Now, open your eyes. Here are some questions to help you picture the people and places in your memory, in your story. Think of all the people involved in your trouble and describe each person. What were their names, their ages? Use one word to identify them. Which people play a large part in your story? What characteristics about these people need to be noted or shared? These 3 questions help you picture the people in your memory. The next 3 will help you picture the setting. What time of year was it? What season was it? Are these important to your story? Describe the setting or places involved with your trouble in your mind's eye. Make note of detail. You see sight, sound, smell, touch, taste. Take out the next, all these questions are on your next handout so that you have it to refer to. So look at the handout that says people and places, and you can refer to it when you're for future times and in this story that you're working on now. So everybody should have that second handout. Now, once you have the characters and setting for your story, then comes the trouble. In every story, there is a point where trouble comes along. Trouble is the friction that makes a story. Remember, without trouble, there is no story. Trouble creates suspense. It's what hooks the audience. It's what keeps their attention and what makes them want to know what's going to happen next. Now, I have used the word trouble, which is a colloquial word. The technical word for trouble in literary analysis is conflict. But the conflict does not have to be violent. Conflict has violent connotations, but in this context, it doesn't. In this context, the conflict can be a struggle, a striving, a yearning. It can be, the conflict can be within the main character, in this case you, since it's a personal story, or it can be between the main character and someone or something else. And it can take many different forms. Take out the next handout, which says conflict or trouble. The conflict or trouble, everybody have that handout? The conflict or trouble can be within yourself. It can be an addiction, an attitude, a fear, a yearning, a self-image. The classic example, there are many examples of such stories. The classic example of a conflict that is within the main character is the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Everybody knows that story, right? In that story, Mr. Hyde is not a character outside of Dr. Jekyll. He is within Dr. Jekyll. He is Dr. Jekyll's evil self. Dr. Jekyll is in mortal conflict with Mr. Hyde, his evil self, as opposed to his good self, which he wants to be. That is a famous example of a conflict within the main character. Now, the conflict can be within yourself, or it can be with someone or something else. It can be another person, but it can be an animal, like the shark in Jaws, or the tiger in The Life of Pi, if anybody saw that great movie. It can be the weather, like The Perfect Storm, that classic George Clooney movie. It can be an illness or a disability, like the speech impediment in The King's Speech, starring, how could I forget who it starred? Mr. Darcy, starring, anybody remember who the actor was in The King's Speech? Anyway. Colin Firth, thank you, Colin Firth, right. It can be an illness or disability like the speech impediment in The King's Speech, in which Colin Firth starred. It can be a social evil like racial or class prejudice, as in Selma, 12 Years a Slave, or Raising Him a Son. It can be a mystery or a problem to solve, like the mysteries of Agatha Christie or Sherlock Holmes. It can be a task to accomplish or a goal to achieve. Sports stories often have that as a conflict, a goal to achieve. I'm thinking of Rocky, that classic sports movie about boxing starring Sylvester Stallone. Another one is Chariots of Fire, which goes way back about winning a race. These are all examples of conflicts that can be in a story. At this point, I'd like you to take a moment to think about what the conflict is in the memory that you've come up with, in the story that you are basing on that memory. Take a moment, I'll give you a moment to think about that, the conflict in your story. See if you can state it in a single sentence summary. The trouble in the memory that you're remembering, basing your story on. Everybody have their conflict? Okay, give me a heads up that I know you have it. Okay, thank you. All right. Now, once you have the conflict or trouble, the heart of your story, a question naturally arises. In any conflict, what is it that we want to know? What is a conflict? What do we want to know? In any conflict, what is it that we want to know the answer to?
Solution.
The solution, how it turns out, right? How it turns out, who wins or who loses. We want to know who wins the conflict, how it turns out. Exactly. Now, in every story, there is a point where we know whether the main character will succeed or fail in his or her struggle. That point is called the turning point. The turning point is not the end of the story. It's not where they actually win or lose. It's the point at which we know that they will, even though it has not occurred yet. For example, it's the point at which we know what the ending will be, even though the ending has not yet occurred. For example, in Cinderella, the turning point in Cinderella is when Prince Charming tries the slipper on Cinderella and it fits. At that point, we know that Cinderella will marry the prince and live happily ever after. That is the turning point. It's not the end, but it's the point where we know the ending is inevitable and what it will be. What is the turning point in the story of Adam and Eve? Somebody want to give me, do you have an answer for that?
When someone eats that,
Yeah.
when they eat the apple.
When they ate the
When
apple.
they eat the apple, yes, thank you for that. When they eat the apple, that's not the end of the story. The end of the story is when they get expelled from the Garden of Eden. But as soon as they eat the apple, we know what the ending will be, even though it has not yet occurred. We know they will be expelled from the Garden of Eden. Now, every story has to have a turning point. Otherwise, the struggle would go on forever and the story would never end. The turning point, the technical term for turning point in literary analysis, there's a technical name for it. Do you know about what that name might be? The technical name for the turning point?
Anticlimax?
No, not the anticlimax.
Resolution.
No,
The denouement.
no, the
Climax.
climax. That's the turning point. The technical name, very good. The technical name for turning point in literary analysis is the climax. It is the highest point of the story. It is the point, everything before that point is the ascending action. Everything after that point is the descending action. It is the high point of the story. It is the point at which we know what the outcome will be, even though it has not yet occurred. Now, take out your next, turn to your next handout, climax or turning point. The climax is the point where we know whether the main character, in this case you, since it's a personal story, will succeed or fail in overcoming the trouble or conflict. Everything up to that point is called the ascending action. Everything after that point is the descending action. It is the high point, the crucial point in the story. Now, once you have the climax, then there is, at this point, I want you to think about what the climax is in your story. What is the point in your story when you know whether or not you will succeed or fail in your struggle, in your conflict? I'll give you a moment to think about what the climax of the turning point is in your story. When does it occur? Everybody have that point? Okay. Is there anybody that needs more time? I don't hear anybody. So, okay, I assume you got your turning point. Write that down at the on this handout. Now, once you have the climax or turning point, there is a consequence to that climax or turning point. There is a result or outcome to the climax, and that result or outcome is called the resolution. The resolution is everything that comes after the climax. It is the result of the climax. It is the conclusion of the story. It's usually short and it ties up the loose ends, but it is not unimportant. A good story has to have a good ending. A story that doesn't have an ending a good ending is an ending that satisfies the audience. And if it doesn't have a good ending, it can ruin an otherwise good story. So the resolution is very important. Look at your next handout, the resolution or conclusion. It's the outcome or result of the climax or turning point. It's the descending action, everything that comes after the climax. It's everything that comes after the climax. It is the conclusion. It's usually short, it ties up the loose ends, but it is not unimportant. A good ending leaves the audience satisfied. Now, an example, classic example of a story that has a good ending is the ending of Pride and Prejudice. If Elizabeth Bennet did not marry Mr. Darcy at the end of Pride and Prejudice, there would be something wrong with the world. The world would not be right. In fact, the world as we know it would not exist. It would be that important, all right? It would be world shattering. Mr. Darcy has to marry Elizabeth Bennet. Otherwise, that story would leave the audience very unsatisfied. Now, that's an example of a good audience, but a good ending that leaves the audience satisfied, but it doesn't have to be a happy ending like the ending in Pride and Prejudice. It can be a tragic ending, like the ending in Romeo and Juliet. What could be more tragic than the ending of Romeo and Juliet, where both the hero and heroine die a tragic death? So that ending is a good ending, even though it's a tragic and sad ending, because it leaves the audience satisfied, and it leaves the audience satisfied because it's inevitable from everything that went before. It's fitting, it's appropriate, it's the way it should turn out based on everything that went before. It leaves the audience satisfied. So the ending is important, the resolution is important. At this point, take a moment to think about what the ending is in your story. State it in a single sentence summary if you can. Okay? Does everybody have their ending, their resolution? Now, if you have the conflict, the climax, and the resolution of your story, all right? The main character, in this case you, since it's a personal story, has learned something from that experience. You have learned something from that experience. You have learned a lesson. This lesson does not have to be world-shattering like the meaning of life. It can be something very simple and ordinary, like there's no place like home. The lesson that Dorothy learned in The Wizard of Oz. That platitude has emotional meaning for Dorothy and for us because Dorothy has experienced the truth of that platitude from her story, and we have experienced it with her. It's no longer a trivial and empty saying because of the emotional meaning that it has been given through the experience in Dorothy's story. Now, the lesson is the sixth component of a story. It can be stated explicitly or implicitly. In a literary work, it's usually implied, but either way, it is there. And whether it is stated explicitly, like the moral in an Aesop's fable, or whether it is implied for the audience to figure out for themselves, it is something that you should know and be able to state. It gives your story clarity, focus, and direction. It helps you to craft your story, to sculpt your story, to eliminate everything that is extraneous to that lesson and include everything that is essential. I'm going to give you at this point some questions that will help you to come up to find the lesson in your story. Now, these questions are just suggestions. They might have nothing to do with the lesson in your story. They're just given by way of example and to prime the pump, so to speak, to help you to come up with the lesson in your story. And here are some of those questions. With your trouble, do you wish you had done something differently? What? What will you or someone else in your story do next time? What advice would you give to someone else who got in trouble the way you did? Did you make changes in your behaviors or attitude after the trouble? If so, why? This helped me to find the lesson in my story, that particular question. What were the consequences of getting in trouble? How did you pay for it or benefit from it in the long run? Take a moment and take your next handout, which says life lessons. You can refer to that and think about what the life lesson is in your story. And I'll give you a moment to come up with that. Okay, does everybody have their lesson? Got it, able to write it down? Okay. All right. Now, once you have your lesson, right, you have the sixth and last component of a story. At this point, we're going to summarize what the six components of a story are. And you can take out your next handout, which says summary. Okay. The first of the six components is the setting. And next to setting, put time and place, because that's what the setting is. It's the time and it's where and when the story occurred. The time and place is your setting. Next to setting, put time and place. The next component of a story is the characters. Now, every story has to have at least two characters. It can have more, but it must have at least two. It has to have a main character, and it has to have a character who opposes the main character. Otherwise, we don't have a conflict and we don't have a story. Now, the main character has a technical name in literary analysis. Can you tell me what the technical name for the main character is in literary analysis?
Protagonist.
I can't, who's talking?
Protagonist.
Protagonist, yes, whoever said that, thank you very much. The protagonist. Agon means struggle and pro means for. So the character who's struggling for something is the protagonist. That's the main character. Now, what do we call the character who opposes the main character?
Antagonist.
Antagonist. Anti, against. The character who struggles against the main character is the antagonist. So the antagonist opposes the protagonist. Now, the protagonist has to be a human being. Otherwise, we can't empathize, we can't identify, we can't get inside that character and experience what that character is experiencing. Now, I have had objections to this. There are people who tell me that there are protagonists who are not human beings. Can you think of any?
An animal, maybe?
An animal, yes, like Bambi in that famous Walt Disney movie, or Dumbo, the elephant, the baby elephant, or the Lion King. These are all animals. These are not human beings, right? Wrong. They think, they feel, they speak as human beings do. They are human beings disguised as animals. So they are human beings. And I can't think of any story in which the main character is not a human being in some kind of form. Now, the main character, the protagonist, has to be a human being, but the antagonist does not. the antagonist can be another person. That's very common. But as we have seen, the antagonist can be something other than that. The antagonist can be an animal, can be the weather, as we have seen, can be an illness or a disability, can be a social or a social evil like racial or class prejudice, can be a mystery or problem to be solved, or goal to be achieved. So the antagonist can be all of those things as well as can be being a human being. So next to characters put protagonist and antagonist. The next component of a story is the trouble. And what's another word for trouble?
Conflict.
Conflict. Put next to trouble, conflict. The next component is the climax. What's another term for climax?
Turning
Point.
Turning point. Thank you. And the next is the resolution. What's another word for the resolution?
ending.
Ending or conclusion, right?
Solution.
And then we have the lesson. Now, the lesson is a colloquial term, really. What's the technical term for lesson in literary analysis? It's a very elegant,
Moral of the story.
Yeah, it can be a moral, but that's not the technical word for it in literary analysis. But it is the moral of the story, yes, the message of the story. But there's a very refined, elegant, sophisticated word that has gravitas to it. That is the technical word that is used in literary analysis for lesson. That word is
Raison d'etre.
raison d'etre. That's a good one, but it's not the one I'm thinking of. It's not, but it would definitely be a proper term for lesson. Yes, it's the theme. Have you heard that expression? The theme, that term. Next to lesson, put theme. Now, theme had an elegance to it that lesson doesn't have. It seems more, as I said, have more gravitas, more profundity. But it's just the lesson, the moral of the story, or the message. And it can be as mundane as the morals of an Aesop fable, like the moral of the theme of the tortoise and the hare is slow and steady wins the race. That moral is the theme in technical terms of the tortoise and the hare. Now, there are themes that have more serious and more significant than perhaps the lessons in the morals of an Aesop fable. And I'm thinking of the plays of George Bernard Shaw. George Bernard Shaw believed that literary work should have a very significant message, a social message, because he was a social reformer and a person who was a social activist. So, for example, the theme in Pygmalion, which the musical My Fair Lady is based upon, the theme of that is that class differences are not innate and inborn, but superficial and acquired. And that theme was the theme of Pygmalion, that the differences between classes is a superficial one, that a Cockney flower girl and a princess, the difference between them is the way they spoke and the way they dressed and the impression they made. So that's the theme on that of George Bernard Shaw's play, Pygmalion. Now, the lesson is the culmination of the story. It's why we love stories, because they teach us. We learn from them. And when we learn, we are transformed, we change, we grow. Stories create change. That is why we love them and why they are so powerful. Now that we have all of these 6 components of a story summarized before us, take a look at those components and think about them with respect to your story. What is the setting in your story? Where and when does it take place? Who are the characters in your story? What is your trouble in your mind's eye? What is the conflict in your story within that in your mind? What is the turning point in your story? Think about that. What is the resolution or conclusion in your story? And what lesson do you learn from your story. Take a moment to think about those 6 components with respect to your story. Does your story have them all, and what are they with respect to your story? I'll give you a moment to think about that. Anybody need more time? Okay. Now, once you've done that, once you have all the components of a story in your head, you have to get them from your head onto paper. And there's a technique for doing that. And that technique is called the story box technique. The story box is a method for crystallizing the components of your story in diagram form. To apply that method, you start off with a box. And now look at the square. Look at the handout that says story box and just has a simple square and nothing else on it. The story box. Mine is filled in, but yours is just empty. Each component of your story has a position on the story box. So if you have that handout, you're going to now write on it. The top of the square is where the setting of your story is going to be put. And at the top of your story box, put setting, and above that, put the time and place in which your story occurred. And I'll give you a moment to do that on your handout, which you should all have. When and where does your story take place? Put that at the top of your square. The right side of your box is where you're going to put the people that are in your story, the characters. On that side, put the names of each character in your story. Next to that, put their age, or underneath it, put their age and one word that identifies who they are in your story. Usually in a short story, there's just a few people, sometimes just 2, sometimes 3 or 4, maybe. So put their names, their age, and one word to identify them. That goes on the right side of your story box. On the bottom of your story box, you're going to put the problem or trouble, the conflict, in other words. State that in a 1-sentence summary, what the conflict is in your story. At the corner of the box, left-hand corner, you're going to put the climax or turning point. State when that occurs, the moment when that occurs. State when that occurs, the climax or turning point of your story. On the left side of the box, that's where the resolution goes, your conclusion. State that in a 1-sentence summary also. And in the middle of the box, put your lesson. Now look at your last handout. It has all the components of a story in the story box for you to refer to when you're writing your story and any other stories that you might write. That is the blueprint for your story. Everybody should have that story box filled in. Okay. Now, once you have the blueprint, once you have a story box filled in with all the components of your story, you have the blueprint from which you're going to build the structure of your story. At this point, I am going to tell you a personal story by way of example. It's my personal story, and I got it from taking this workshop. I fleshed out the bones of my story with dialogue, description, and detail to form a finished product. And it took me a year to do that after I had gotten the bare bones. So keep that in mind. My story will be polished because I've worked on it for a year. And when you work on yours, it'll be polished too. As I tell the story, make a mental note or a written note of the components of the story as they appear in my story. What's the setting in my story? Who are the people? What's my conflict? When does the turning point occur? What's the resolution or conclusion of my story? And what lesson do I learn? After I tell the story, we will analyze it for those 6 components. So right now I'm going to stop sharing and go back to our gallery view, and I will tell you my story. And it's about 7 minutes long, a typical Toastmaster length story. And the title of the story is The Lesson I Learned in Sister Regina's Class. I was 4 years old and I was a failure. I failed kindergarten. I not only failed it once, I failed it 3 times. When I was a child, promotion occurred twice a year at Our Lady of Grace Elementary School in a suburb of New York City where I lived. And so when I was 4 and a half, my kindergarten class was promoted to the 1st grade. I was not promoted with them. I was left back. I was the only one. I tried harder. When I was 5, the kindergarten class that had come in 6 months after me was promoted to the 1st grade. I was not promoted with them. I was left back. I was the only one. I tried harder still. I napped with all my might. I colored inside the lines with the meticulousness of Michelangelo. I built architectural monuments with my wooden blocks that rival the Eiffel Tower and the Taj Mahal. When I was 5 and a half, the next kindergarten class was promoted to the 1st grade. I was not promoted with them. I was left back. I was the only one. I stopped trying. An inner voice said, "You are not smart, Mary Lou. It doesn't matter how hard you try. It won't make any difference." I had no doubt of this. I believed it as unquestioningly as I believed that chocolate milk came from brown cows. It was the way it was, and there was nothing that I could do about it. When I was 6, the new kindergarten class was promoted to the 1st grade. I was promoted with them. I had no idea why. It seemed to have nothing at all to do with anything I did. True to form, I promptly failed 1st grade, which was no surprise to me, but it was to my grandmother. My grandmother was an institution at Our Lady of Grace Elementary School. She played the piano and conducted the musical the musical productions at the end of each term. She had great influence with the nuns, and she used it to have me promoted. If it weren't for my grandmother, I would still be in first grade. I promptly failed second grade. I was put ahead again, compliments of my grandmother. I proceeded to fail third grade. I was promoted anyway. I failed my way all the way up to fourth grade. My grandmother's influence knew no bounds. It wasn't until I was older that I found out that it was because of my grandmother that I started kindergarten at the age of 4. At Our Lady of Grace Elementary School, children started first grade at about the age of 6. Therefore, they entered kindergarten at about the age of 5.5. My grandmother thought I would be better off in kindergarten than at home, and used her influence with the nuns to have me start at the age of 4, a year and a half too early. That explains my 3 failures and why I was left back in kindergarten. I was left back until I was old enough to start first grade. In fourth grade, I arrived in Sister Regina's class. Sister Regina was beautiful. She seemed much younger than the other nuns. I believe she was 19. She must have told us that was her age, because that's the age that sticks in my mind. And she looked like 19. She had pink cheeks and blue eyes, and she was always smiling. Her face was framed by the black and white nun's habit of the Ursuline order. Sister Regina had come from Quebec, Canada. My grandmother had come from Quebec. I felt a kinship with Sister Regina because I was French Canadian too. She told us stories about sleigh rides in the snow, about her mother and father and sisters and brothers, horse-drawn sleigh rides in the snow, about her mother and father and sisters and brothers. I always pictured her with snow on her eyelashes. When I stepped into Sister Regina's class, I was stepping into another world, the world of her childhood in Quebec. In Sister Regina's class, everything went well for me. I even won something for the first time in my life. Sister Regina had a raffle, and I won a pair of rosary beads. They were little, plain, inexpensive black beads, but they were the most beautiful beads in the world to me. Something else happened to me for the first time in Sister Regina's class. I passed a test. I copied from Kathleen Holmes. Kathleen Holmes got an 84 on that test. I got an 85. I got 1 point on my own. Maybe that was a revelation, an epiphany for me. For the first time, I doubted my belief in my stupidity. Maybe I wasn't dumb. I started trying. When the next test came along, I didn't copy from anybody. Every point I got on that test, I got on my own. I passed that test. Sister Regina was proud of me. I could see it in her face. I didn't believe I was dumb anymore. My goal was to get 100 on every test and make Sister Regina proud of me. I tried with all my might. When Sister Regina returned the first test I got 100 on, she said, "I'm proud of you, Mary Lou. You got 100%. You were the only one." No teacher ever meant as much to me as Sister Regina. She was the most important teacher I ever had. And the most important lesson I ever learned, I learned in Sister Regina's class. Believe in yourself. You become what you believe. The end. Thank you. Now, we analyze the story. What's the setting in my story? When does it take place and where? You can unmute yourself now since you'll be answering questions.
Catholic school.
Our
Catholic-
Lady of Grace Elementary.
Wow, what a memory. Yes, the Catholic Elementary School, Lady of Grace Elementary. Yes, what a memory. And it took place about when I was a child, about 20 or 25 years ago, I say, took place about sometime in the 19 something or others. Now, actually 1930s. Now, who are the characters in my story?
Grandmother,
My grandmother, who's the start of all my trouble. Yes, my grandmother.
Sister Regina.
Sister Regina, yes, the person who supported me, Sister Regina, who was so good to me, so kind.
Mary Lou.
And me, I'm the main character. Yes, thank you, me. And one other character, do you remember? She was only mentioned once.
Kathleen Holmes.
Kathleen Holmes. Wow, we've got a star pupil here. What a memory. Kathleen Holmes. Yes, those are the main characters, and those are the 4 characters in my story. Yes. Now, what is my conflict? What do I want more than anything? What am I trying to do?
You want to go to the move up a grade.
I want to move up a grade. Perfect. Exactly. Hit the nail on the head. I want to pass. I want to go on to the next grade. And I don't. I don't in kindergarten, and then I don't in first grade, second grade, third grade. I get put ahead, but I don't really get promoted. I just get, I don't really graduate on my own steam. Yeah. So I wanted to go to the next grade. Okay. And pass a test. What is the turning point in my story?
You were promoted.
1 point.
When you got
You got 1 point.
I got 1 point, right. When I copied from Kathleen Holmes, I got 1 point on my own. That was the turning point, because then I started to have belief in myself. I started to doubt that I was stupid. And once I had belief in myself and thought I could learn, I started trying. That was the turning point. Very good, Dan.
Ask
Okay.
a question.
Question?
Ask a question.
Yes?
Was it possible that your grandmother's, what would you say, influence involved when she came into your life? Can there be more than one turning point? Was that a turning point? Because then when she started moving you up grades, wasn't that a turning point?
No, because I didn't believe that was due to me. I believe that had nothing to do with me, and I was just put ahead anyway. And she was the start, but she was the start of the trouble. She was the person who initiated the conflict in my life. If it hadn't been for her, I wouldn't have been left back in first grade and kindergarten. There wouldn't have been a conflict.
Was
So
the turning point have to do with the main character in the story?
Yes, the turning point has to do with the main character. Yes. Yeah. Good questions. Okay, so that's a turning point. What's the resolution? What's the outcome? The conclusion of that turning point? What happens as a result of it?
You start trying.
I start trying. Exactly. That is the consequence of the turning point. Because when I had faith in myself, I started trying. And when I tried, I succeeded. And I couldn't have succeeded if I didn't start trying. So that was the resolution. I started trying, and when I tried, I did very well. I passed my tests. And by implication, I got promoted to the next grade, Danny. And what is the lesson of my story? What lesson did I learn?
underestimate yourself.
You were
can't-
smart, that you were
That
capable.
I was capable. And that the lesson was that I was capable. And how did I put that in the how did I word it? This
Yourself, you become what you believe.
Yes, believe in yourself, you become what you believe. I believed I was capable, therefore I became capable. Right. Thank you very much. You have been a wonderful class. And now you're going to have your turn to tell your story. And what we're going to do, I think we're going to break you up into groups of two each. How many people do we have, Edward, in online? Yeah, on Zoom?
Yeah, on Zoom, we have 6.
6 people?
6 people.
Okay, I'd like to, you can pair them off, Edward, I'll leave that up to you. Put them in breakout rooms in groups of 2.
Okay.
And what you have to do in that breakout room, you will have, I'll give you 6 minutes, okay? In that breakout room, you are to tell each person in the breakout room is to tell the other his or her story and then switch. And when you both had time to tell your story, you have 3 minutes each, then you will come back and you will tell the story if you want to. I have people volunteer to tell the story to the group as a whole, both on Zoom and in person. So do you know what you have to do now? Okay, how many people in person?
I have a question, Mary Lou.
Oh,
Are
sure.
we actually telling this story or are we like, because in 3 minutes,
Yes.
we telling the outline of the story?
Yeah, the outline, whatever you can tell in 3
Okay.
minutes. Right? And when you come back, you should have a little bit more time to tell. I'll try to give everybody 5 minutes if we have time. Okay? All right, good question. Okay, and how many people are in person there?
6.
6.
Okay, break up into groups of 2 also. Okay, I'll leave it up to you now, Edward, to put them into the breakout rooms.
All right, for the breakout rooms for the remote, why don't we pair, let's see, Robert and Danny? Does that sound good? Okay, I'll put you guys in room 1.
There's just,
And we just lost Megan.
yeah, so there's just 3 more.
So you can put Noel, Dan, and I in a group.
Yeah,
Okay. Noel, Brandon, and Dan. Okay. Okay, so we have them in the breakout rooms, and then here we will do our own breakout room. Okay.
The 2 panels are gonna be together.
Yeah, why don't you two shouldn't be together. Well, unless you want, I was saying, like,
Yeah.
mix up the groups. I think I'm gonna do more of the IT stuff, so I'll just, Rosemary, what do you want the groups to be?
Come back.
We're gonna be a group of 2 girls.
Okay, sounds good. All right, Mark.
All right, all right.
Margaret,
Where should I?
So we're breaking up.
wanna join us, Jim?
okay.
Do you just wanna, I guess you can
I'll
just
t-
listen to our
You
group.
want me to start timing now?
This is
You
really.
wanna talk to us? Or
You wanna tell yours first?
do you wanna talk to us, or do you wanna visit the breakout rooms? I can have you,
Pardon me?
why don't you, I'll have you visit the breakout rooms for a couple minutes, and then I'll have you come back to this
I
room.
don't know.
Okay,
Does that work?
So I just
Yeah.
want.
Okay.
What I was
I'm sending you to
gonna
room 1 right now.
say is called like fire.
are you starting now?
Yeah.
Okay,
So I
You
built
know,
this.
Yeah.
so-
You should see an invite.
So, yeah.
So the research section.
The invitation, if you're on someone.
Senior management. The people would be the management team, the senior executives, 40 to 60 years old.
So, what am I?
The problem, the trouble that they were having with business was there wasn't a consensus on as to how to go about growing a business and they weren't reaching their optimal potential for the company. So we would go through the process, the climax, and the core aspect of our process.
Work for them. And I know it's sad to see a family home going in, but that was a conflict for me because it's hard because it's been in the family for a while. But the good thing is, it's nice to see that my grandparents can settle down and they're gonna get a RV or a trailer, something like that. So it's nice that they can enjoy themselves and not have to keep up with cleaning a huge house. and all that, even though that it was sad for them selling the house. But I found the good and bad in the whole situation.
What was the conflict for you?
The conflict was, I guess, with the whole just accepting that they're actually going to go ahead and sell the house just because it's been in the family for years. And everybody, and my grandfather and my grandmother's brother, they built the house. They literally built the house. So that's kind of like a conflict. It's like, you know, it's just the conflict for me, I guess it's, you know, and I'd rather just have them keep it, but they can't. But so
how did you resolve it?
I resolved it in the way was I took a lot of photos of the home and I was thinking about, well, this is going to be pretty good now. And my great grandmother's not there anymore. So I resolved it that I know that it's sad for it to go, but I know it's going to be better for my grandparents because now they can get now they can travel around the USA and do what they want and not have so many responsibilities. Because my grandfather, he spends 3 to 4 hours a day mowing. They
Wow.
got 10+ acres.
Okay,
All right. Who goes
good
next?
job. You do.
I do. Okay.
Okay, Edward, you can switch me to another room.
Okay, yeah, we were just dropping in. I wanted to
okay.
get, I wanted to get Mary Lou around to the different groups.
Oh, sure.
To chime
Okay.
in.
Yeah, you
All
did
right.
very well. Great story and great questions.
Yeah, thanks.
Well done.
So
Good pairing.
Go
Danny,
ahead,
I
and-
would-
go ahead
I
and leave
would-
the room, Mary, at the bottom right.
Okay.
Just click on leave room.
Good job,
Danny, I
guys.
was, bye-bye. Danny, I was 16 years old. I had just,
It all worked out. So our lesson then was and or join the book club instead of.
Yeah.
There you go. Those are my lessons on that. Yes.
Okay, Edward, I'm ready to go to the next room.
Okay, places, our first home, Summer Road, DC area.
Focus on what you want.
The cast of characters, MJ, our daughter, Rachel, social worker, Jim.
Okay, sent you the invite.
Don't waste time doing everything to
Mary Jo
avoid
is
what you
out.
really want.
And the social worker, this shows us how they
Yeah.
come and check. And they have to call scheduled visits. And then they have surprise, we'll be at your house in 10 minutes. I say, oh, Friday night, we went to our Friday night.
Can I find a way not to be a late person? So I decided that I could think differently, and I decided that I was going to change my life and I was not going to be a late person anymore. So I set out on a journey to figure out a way for me not to be late anymore. And one of those ways was for me to plan everything that I needed to do before I needed to get to the place. Like when you're a late person, all you do is think about that you have to be there at 8. So I'd leave at 8. Like I never planned anything about how to leave the house on time. So I just started really like thinking differently, and it's going to take me 15 minutes to do this and 20 minutes to do this. And so I just decided to do that. What I learned from that is that there's a whole new side to life. I was on time or early to things. I did not feel stressed out anymore. I had such a different way about me. I was much more relaxing as a person. I was a dupe, we call it a dupe-to-dupe driver, dupe-to-dupe-to-dupe. So I became a dupe-to-dupe driver, and I just didn't have this high anxiety or stress about getting to places on time. And what resulted from that is I had better relationships with my family and my friends. I felt like I felt better about myself, and I didn't feel as much stress anymore. So that is my story about my being late. And I'm going to expand on it. I was telling them that I'm working on this as a presentation that I want to do for different people, because I want it to be a lesson for other people who are late. So I want to develop a whole technique, like this is what I did. So I just talked to my coach today about us getting this started. So it was like a perfect opportunity
Oh,
to start
great.
working on my story.
I
Yeah.
can so identify with that because I am a late person and I want to hear your story. I can
Well,
learn a lot from it.
Wonderful.
think
So when I get it better, I will definitely find you and I will share the larger story about it with you.
I would love to hear it. Great job. I have to leave now to go to
Yeah.
the next room and have.
Are we at, how are you
Okay,
on?
so I'll see you in a little while. Okay, I'm leaving the room, Edward. Okay, last room.
I'm fine. Michael will be fine.
We're out of rooms.
Out of rooms?
Yeah.
Oh, that was it. Okay.
And.
I think we probably can
It's that kind of stuff.
stop now.
With an appropriate.
You wanna, just listen in on, I can put the camera on some of the groups. How about that?
So
Oh, that's a good idea. That's a good idea.
But you know what, my goal out in LA, we're going for an after they.
It could be India.
Well, not that. Thankfully not that one, but then we'll do the whole street sales and then.
So that's Rosemary.
It's a model that actually. Friend of
Yes.
started doing.
A nice.
Really up front. And. they did it for a long time. She had that. We got married, about a year after that. and
Okay,
then-
Edward, do you have any other groups to show me?
Yeah, there's a group back here.
Do, put it together. No.
Checking in with Mary for work, you know.
She's where,
Oh.
Strategize.
Hi, Marilyn.
Hi.
Mary Lou, this was, I really enjoyed this. This was really a valuable tool here for me to use, and it's a great tool that I'm gonna use for sure.
Oh, I'm delighted to hear that. That warms my heart. That was my aim. It's wonderful to hear you say that. I'm gonna end it. I'm gonna give you one more minute, and then we're going to come back as a group, as a whole. Okay, I'll tell you when I want to come back, Edward.
yeah, I'll let the other groups know that they have a minute left.
Okay,
So that's a chat.
Rosemary's got me on the hook. Probably will.
Was she the female?
You want an autograph?
She's only 26 years old and she's disabled.
I'll sign your version.
Found her.
You know, I know where he was. You visit her,
Membership.
Washington's
And
place.
they're starting
He had
they
a
might
two-seater.
develop crafts. The Filipinos. are.
Really?
He's looking into ways.
She's out there with Martha,
I guess.
holding hands, on a bad night.
And then we went to the Springfield.
Negotiating, communicating.
Want to see this?
Oh, you see, one of the things on the agenda is
It was older. No, Washington was older. Did you go to Montgomery?
Think on your feet.
Oh, my God. Montgomery was so
Edward, is the time up yet?
Not yet, I'm just sending them a message now.
Huge marble land. Of course, Mary, I'll carry it into well. He's so one of my.
Give you one of these.
But he had a huge farm. Just
Probably
looks right.
I just sent them a message with instructions on how to leave the room.
But you go in there, it's, everything's kind
Okay, time is up.
Give them a little about 30 more seconds to wrap up.
Okay,
Just send them a message.
okay.
I'll put the camera back on.
Rocky.
As a young man, by the way, Brazil. Homeless stuff, yeah.
Since you were-
She was
What we
Italian.
do, when the first improvement visit, so we took him to the FBI. Spends the old mules, whatever. Well,
And then he became a police officer.
That's right.
Uh-huh.
We can tell the residents is all.
There's so many stories. Yeah.
Okay. We all should be back to our main group. We should all be in the main, we should all be together now. Person and the people on
Danny,
Zoom.
Danny and Rob aren't back.
I'll send them a message.
Okay,
Or I'll go in there and tell them to come back.
I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if it was your husband, I wasn't sure.
That's what she did.
It's like, just be.
My grandparents are in their 70s, and it's just, it's like a full-time job to keep
Yeah.
up with everything.
Yeah,
So, yeah, I know.
unmuted.
Sorry, can you come back when you're ready? We're
Oh,
all-
leave room. Okay, yeah.
Okay,
leave
yeah, just
breakout
leave
room.
room at the
All right,
bottom right and then
See
leave.
Danny, bottom right, leave breakout room. We're
Exactly.
too busy having a good time.
That's okay.
Okay, how do I leave the room?
Leave room
okay.
Did we lose?
I'd like now to have a volunteer from any group, either in person or online, to tell their story to the group as a whole. And you will have 3 minutes to tell you. Now, it doesn't, not going to be a full-fledged story, but I guess 3 minutes because we have not that much time left. So who would like,
That's where they got the
who would like to tell their story to the group as a whole?
car.
I'd like volunteers, either from the in-person place or either from those who are there in person or those who are on Zoom. Would you like to tell their story to the group? Two good ones. Any volunteer? Don't be shy. All right, Rob the fire. Thank you, Rob.
Okay, quiet in the podium. Sergeant Arms says quiet. Any volunteers here for the sheriff?
You shared.
Lisa.
Ready for me to go?
Yep, go ahead, Rob.
Okay,
I was 16 years old. I had just gotten my driver's license and I had taken driver's ed on an automatic car. Well, our only vehicle was a stick shift. It was a 1972 orange Volkswagen Bug. And my father said to me, "Come on, Robbie, we're going to go out and I'm going to teach you how to drive a stick." Well, I lived in a neighborhood similar to what you'd have in Sarasota, so there wasn't any traffic on these roads. Dad gets me in the car. He has me start it up, push in the clutch, and I stalled that sucker for probably a half an hour. Back then, we weren't wearing seatbelts, and fortunately, neither one of us got whiplash, but he got so ticked off that he left me. He walked out of the car. He said, "I give up." So here I was probably, maybe a quarter of a mile from my house, and I had to figure out how to get this thing back home. Well, fortunately, after about an hour, I was able to get that thing from first gear to second gear and at least get it back to the house. Well, I practiced by myself because Dad had given up. And finally, after about a month, I was able to get that thing into fourth gear. And after about 2 months, I got the courage to drive that thing on the highway. So the climax for me was that if you work at it hard enough, you're going to be able to get it into fourth gear. And the lesson that I learned from this was I could have given up, but if with persistence and just determination, you can accomplish anything.
Great job.
That's my story.
Great job, Robin. You had all the components in your story down to the lesson at the end. Thank you so much. And you told it with vim and vigor and enthusiasm. Good job. And thank you for being the first one up. You're a hero. Good job. All right. Anybody else would like to follow that Rob's lead?
Brandon?
I'll give it a shot.
Right, Brandon. Go ahead.
Easter Sunday. It was at my aunt's house. It was the theme and most anticipated event of the year. She lived on a 5-acre property. So with that 5 acres, it was a Easter egg hunt. Anywhere was fair game. And from 9 o'clock till 12 o'clock, you were trying to find every egg. This was the first year my cousin decided to step out because he was the prize and sole winner every single year of getting the golden egg. And this time they upped the ante, $300 for the golden egg.
Wow.
So I wanted it, and I was gonna get it because my nickname was Hawkeyes. I could find that needle in the haystack or the needle in the pile of rocks. My eyesight was good, so I knew I was getting that egg. Rolling around 12 o'clock, my mom nudged me to go towards a bush. As I kept going through this general vicinity, I got into a 1 foot by 1 foot area. I was digging my hand into that bush any which way, determined that there would be an egg there. My mom did not mention there was an egg, but she said, look in that bush. So I did. And I spent a good 30 minutes doing it. I gave up. I didn't see anything. And I went to several of our bushes in that area and picked up other eggs. And then I left that vicinity. When my back was to that bush, my mom went to that bush because she knew the golden egg was in there. And when she spread the bushes apart, what lay there was not only a golden egg, but a rattlesnake coiled around it. So, as I continued along my way, the event stopped. My mom brought me forward, and my cousin had to go and fetch the snake. The rattlesnake was about 3 feet long. His head was about this big, nice, a little bit bigger than a quarter, but enough venom to put me in the hospital and have to get bay flighted to Tampa airport because the neighbor, that's what happened the year before. So without further ado, my cousin, the year in which he did not participate, he won the golden egg. And for saving us all, we felt he deserved it. But now what's the moral of the story? What's the reason? Well, in life, you can't connect the dots in the moment, but sometimes your greatest blessings are in disguise. And then that bush was and could have been death to me. But instead, I did not see the golden egg, nor did I find the snake. Nothing was there for me, and I looked in that bush for 30 minutes.
Wow.
And sometimes in life, when you're in the midst of things, your greatest blessings are blinded. So.
Wow, great story. Thank you for that. Wow, the conflict there was pretty clear. You wanted to find that golden egg, and the climax, when the snake, your mother found the snake wrapped around that golden egg. That was quite an exciting and very vivid story. Very, very gripping. Very great amount of suspense. Great story. Thank you for that, Brandon. That was terrific. I can't get over how good these stories are. 2 great stories to start out with. Thank you so much. And great moral. Sometimes, blindness is your blessing in disguise. Blindness is your greatest blessing. Great story. Thank you. Thank you, Brandon. Next up, who would like to be next? I know there's good stories because I heard you telling them. I know they're there.
I'll do one.
Great. Who said that?
Can you hear me from here?
Yeah. Do you want to go up to the, I've got the camera.
Oh.
Great.
All right.
Stepping up to the podium.
Great. That's the place to be. Good.
I know this is gonna be like you flunking kindergarten, because I did this a little differently than everybody else. I do this as a business story. And I work with companies, I think everybody here knows, you probably don't, I work with companies on strategy. And the core aspect of our process is a 3-day offsite meeting. So I use this story within that regard there. So the place and setting would be an offsite strategy session with the senior management team and the C-level executives in the company. The problem or trouble would be that they had not developed a consensus around how they were going to grow the business and reach their optimal potential for the company. So that's why we were having this session. When we do our 3-day session, the second day, the key aspect that comes out of that is to determine the one thing that is at the root of the strategy of the business. So my climax or turning point would be the second day in the afternoon, when they would figure out the one thing that was at the root of the strategy of their business. And the resolution would be that they would develop a consensus around this and go forward and grow their company. And the lesson for me, or the lesson for them, would be to be able to understand what is the one thing that is at the root of the strategy of your business or your life, because from that, everything else carries forth.
Wow.
That was an interesting application of the components of a story, the structure of a story to business story. And the climax would be defining that strategy that would work and make them successful. So that's a very interesting application of it. Thank you. I don't know what your name was.
Mark.
Who was that?
George Washington was my name.
George. Thank you for that. That was a very unique way of interesting way to apply it, an original and creative way to apply it. Thank you.
Yeah, we did.
Next, what did you say? I can't hear him.
Said that George Washington and I went to school together. And I said, yeah, we dated the same girl.
I'll go next. if you want.
Okay, great.
We have time for one more.
Yes, we do.
All right. So the story I'm going to tell is I was telling my group that this is a presentation that I am working on that I want to share with other people because I want to help them learn the lesson that I learned. And I feel like it could be really valuable. So the setting or the time or place is throughout my whole life. So this was something that I dealt with throughout my whole life until I learned my lesson, which was probably about 15 years ago.
Wow.
Who it affected or who was part of it would be me, all the people that I've known, family, friends, my daughter, employers, employees, my accounts that I worked with, the events that I went to, my patients. So it really affected everyone in my life. And what was the problem? It was that I was late for everything. I was a late person. I did not know how to get to any place early or do anything early. I thought it was something in me and that I could never change. My husband had told me at some point that being late, that he had read or heard something that being late was a form of arrogance. I did not like that. I argued with him, quite frankly, a lot about that, telling him it was just something ingrained in me. My mother was late. I was late. I was a late person. What was the conflict or the climax that made me change my ways? I got a speeding ticket. And then shortly after that, I got another speeding ticket. Why did I get a speeding ticket? I got a speeding ticket because I was late and I was driving fast. If you got in front of me during these years, I was a very aggressive driver. I thought I owned the road. I thought I had the right to be in front of you because after all, I was late and I had to get somewhere. Now, I didn't really realize any of this. I didn't know that I was this arrogant, aggressive driver. I just thought it was a normal way of being. I was always stressed out because I was always trying to get everywhere quick and, weaving in and out and everybody in my way and everything. So after I got these 2 speeding tickets, I did a heart-to-heart with myself and I decided that I didn't want to be that way anymore. And I made a decision that I was going to find a way to think differently and not be a late person anymore. I really did some soul searching and realized the impact that it had on everyone that I knew. So I decided I would plan out everything. I never thought about how long it took me to get from A to B. I had to be somewhere at 8. I left my house at 8. Like I just didn't think the right way about it. So I started planning out, okay, I need to be somewhere at 8. It's going to take me this much time to get ready, this much time to, make my lunch, this much time to take a shower. And I really added all that together. And then I also added on the driving time, which you would have thought, the average person would do. And then I added on 15 minutes. So if I had to leave the house at 8, I would say I'm going to leave, 15 minutes earlier. So I started doing this and my behavior started changing. And what the impact was that I realized that being on time shifted my energy in a way where I wasn't stressed out anymore. I didn't have anxiety when I got someplace. I didn't have to worry about where I was going to park and how I was going to get my seat and who I was going to have to, plow over, or what excuse I was going to use why I was late. Oh, the traffic was bad. Oh, I didn't know, I had to go this way or that way. It was always the excuses but I didn't know any of this. Like it was just so ingrained. So when I became a non-late person, I also became a little bit of an early person and I saw the world in a different way. I would get to a concert early and I would see it all unfolding in front of me. And I had this lightness and this joy that I didn't have before. So I want to show other people that they can do that as well. And I want to help them, guide them through these processes that I went through to help them realize that they too can shift their behavior and not be a late person anymore. So thank you very much.
Great story. Thank you. That's Nicole?
Noelle.
Noelle, I'm sorry, that's Noelle. That was wonderful. You had your conflict. You were always late. You didn't want to be late. You wanted to overcome it. The climax when you got the speeding tickets and you knew you had to make a change. And then the outcome, the result of that, the resolution, you became an early person, an on time and an early person, and you reap the benefits of that. It was so much better than being a late person. It's so much more relaxed. And the lesson you learned was you can do it if you make your mind up to do it. You want something, you can do it if you try. Great stories. Thank you so much. You have been wonderful. I love these stories and I'm so grateful to you to having me come and do my workshop. I really enjoyed it. And you have been great students and told great stories. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm very impressed
It
with
was
the talk.
wonderful.
Thank you, Mary Lou.
Yes,
Thank
it was a great process. So thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Great. Great being here. Okay.
Third storytelling theme throughout, so we'll see what we can do with this, turn everything, your business, your profession into some sort of story.
That would be great. I'd love to hear how it turns out. Yeah.
Speech off. Do we have time for it? Is now 8:00. We'll have our executive meeting next week, officers, all right, instead of tonight. Thank you again.
No.
Maybe we can turn off.
Rosemary.